All right, so today we're diving into a topic that I think is often shrouded in misunderstanding. Psychosis.
It's a big one, for sure.
Yeah, and to really get a handle on it, we're going beyond the clinical stuff, the
Oh,
textbooks and diagnoses. We're going straight to a first-hand account.
much more insightful, I find.
Definitely. We'll be exploring excerpts from psychos.txt.
Interesting source.
Yeah, it's this online text where the author, who's been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, details their experience with not one, but two psychotic breaks.
Wow, two. You don't always hear about that, those multiple experiences.
Right, and what makes this source even more interesting is that the author actually works in the medical field.
Really?
Yeah, so they're coming at this with a unique perspective, having both the lived experience and some medical knowledge.
That's fascinating. It makes me think about how those early experiences, they can really shape our paths, can't they? The author's journey actually began with their mother, who also struggled with paranoid schizophrenia.
Oh, wow, so they witnessed that firsthand.
They did. Imagine seeing a parent go through something as intense and disorienting as psychosis. It's no wonder it left such a mark on them, even influencing their career path. It's like this drive to understand something that probably felt both terrifying and strangely compelling at the same time.
Yeah, I can see that. This deep need to make sense of something so powerful.
Absolutely. And it speaks to a human experience we often shy away from. The idea that sometimes our desire to understand something can lead us right into the heart of it.
And in the author's case, that's exactly what happens. At 24, in the thick of medical school, they experience their first psychotic break.
Wow, 24. Right when life is already pretty demanding.
Right. They talk about this perfect storm of intense studying, sleep deprivation, and using cannabis as potential triggers.
It's rarely just one thing, though, right?
Yeah.
Psychosis is so complex.
Totally. Everyone's different. What might be a trigger for one person might not phase another. It's usually a whole mix of things. Genetics, environment, and that individual vulnerability all playing a part.
Like a tipping point, those vulnerabilities get pushed too far. So how does it actually start for them? What does that break actually look like?
Well, the author describes this sudden and drastic shift in their perception. Imagine feeling like you've suddenly unlocked some hidden layer of understanding about the world.
Okay, I've heard that before. Like the world is suddenly revealing its true nature.
Exactly, except it's a truth that only they seem to have access to, which is where things start to veer into the territory of delusions. Their particular delusions centered around the philosopher Nietzsche.
Nietzsche. That's interesting.
Right. They were really into "Thus spoke Zarathustra" and became convinced they were Nietzsche reincarnated, like they were channeling his essence.
That's a pretty intense delusion. It makes you think about that human need for meaning, for purpose, for control.
And boy, does the author seem to find it, at least in their mind. They go from medical student to this messianic figure, convinced they hold the key to awakening humanity to some new reality. They start hearing voices, too, but not just any voices, telepathic messages, instructions from some higher power.
It's like their world becomes infused with this sense of grand purpose, and they're at the center of it all. And here's the thing about delusions. They're not just random, bizarre thoughts. They often form a narrative, a story that feels completely real and internally consistent within the world the person is experiencing.
It's like their own internal logic system takes over.
Exactly. And for the author, that system involved believing they had superpowers, that they could actually control world events, which, as you can imagine, leads to some pretty risky behavior.
And it all culminates in this incident with fire, which lands them in the hospital. It's their first real encounter with the mental health system, a harsh wake-up call to the very real consequences that delusions can have.
It's a good place to pause and reflect, I think. The author's experience, while unique in its details, highlights this crucial point. The line between fascination with psychosis and the very real human cost of this condition, that line can get blurry.
It's a reminder that we need to approach this topic with sensitivity and respect. It's easy to get caught up in the, almost fantastical elements of the story.
Yeah, the delusions, the idea of a hidden reality, it's captivating.
It is, but then we have to circle back to the aftermath, the recovery. After that first psychotic break, the author spends months piecing their life back together.
It reminds us that psychosis is episodic, right? It's an episode, not a defining characteristic.
Right. It's not who they are. It's something they went through. And the author actually manages to return to a place of, well, relative stability at least,
Yeah.
even going back to their demanding job in medicine.
That in itself speaks volumes about resilience. The human mind is capable of remarkable recovery.
It really is. And it sounds like medication played a key role in the author's journey back to stability. They're very open about using antipsychotics to manage their symptoms, but they also don't shy away from talking about the
The
downsides.
side effects. Yeah.
Exactly. The weight gain, the lack of motivation, that emotional blunting that some people experience.
It's a trade-off a lot of people struggle with. Finding the right medication, the right dosage, it's a process. And even then, those side effects, they can be tough.
It's like you're trading one set of challenges for another.
Exactly. And I think that leads to a crucial point.
Mm.
Mental health treatment, it's not one size fits all. What works for one person might not work for another. And even finding that balance between symptom management and quality of life, that can be really tricky.
It's deeply personal, and for the author, that struggle with the side effects of their medication, it ultimately leads to their second psychotic break.
Because they decided to taper off their medication.
They did, yeah. And I know what you might be thinking. Why would someone do that if the medication was helping? But imagine those side effects day in and day out. For some people, it can feel like just another form of confinement.
I see what you mean. It's a difficult decision, no doubt. And unfortunately for the author, this attempt to regain a sense of control over their own life, it backfires.
And not just a little backfire, they describe the second break as even more intense, more fragmented than the first.
Oh, wow. So their experience of reality, it gets even more distorted.
It does, and their delusions this time, they revolve around what they call source coders. They describe it like their whole world is a simulation controlled by these entities who communicate telepathically. They even use these computer terms like cheat codes and a developer console to explain what they're going through.
Wow, it's like their mind is trying to grasp at something that exists outside the realm of our shared reality. So it latches onto these metaphors, these analogies that we can at least partially understand.
It's their way of trying to bridge that gap, to make sense of something that feels completely nonsensical to the rest of us. And they're desperate, too. They talk about constantly being in communication with these source coders, trying to find a way to escape the simulation, to reach what they believe is heaven.
And that desperation, that unwavering belief in their delusions, it leads to some risky behavior, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it does. They start breaking into buildings, convinced that each one holds the key to unlocking some portal to another dimension. It's heartbreaking because you can see how their actions, driven by these really strong delusions, are being completely misinterpreted.
Misinterpreted by whom?
By the people around them, the authorities. They end up having these run-ins with the police.
That's tough because it highlights a really important point about mental health, especially when interacting with someone experiencing psychosis. There's often a huge gap between what's happening in someone's mind, their internal reality, and how that manifests externally in their behavior.
It's like two completely different worlds colliding. And the people caught in the middle, they don't always have the tools or the understanding to navigate that collision. There's this one moment the author describes that really struck me. Their friends come over to hang out, they're playing video games, just trying to have a good time, completely oblivious to the internal turmoil going on in the author's head.
It's like that disconnect between the experience of psychosis and the experience of everyday reality. It's just amplified in those situations.
Exactly. The author's having these intense, vivid visions of gods playing cosmic chess, while their friends are just worried about which level they're going to beat next.
It makes you think about the isolating nature of psychosis, doesn't it? The feeling of being trapped in two realities at once.
It's a powerful image. And just when you think it can't get any more chaotic, the author introduces this whole other layer to their delusions, something they call the Z virus. They describe it as this malevolent entity messing with their memory, causing all these problems.
Like their delusions are compounding on top of each other.
Exactly, and it creates this overwhelming sense of urgency and impending doom. They become convinced they need to fix a bug in the system to prevent the universe from collapsing, literally.
Wow, the weight of the world on their shoulders.
It's a lot, and tragically, this escalation of their delusions leads to more destructive behavior, more run-ins with the police, and eventually another forced hospitalization.
Another hospitalization. So twice now they've been in this position where their experience of reality is so at odds with what's considered normal.
And this time, it takes an even darker turn. This time, during their hospitalization, the author experiences something that pushes them to an even deeper level of despair. Catatonia.
Catatonia, wow. That's a whole other level of complexity.
They describe spending 2 weeks in a completely catatonic state, unresponsive, withdrawn, almost completely shut down. It's like their mind and body just couldn't handle the intensity of what they were going through, so they just froze.
It's a really powerful defense mechanism, actually. When the external world becomes too overwhelming, the mind can retreat inwards, creating this protective shell. But it's also incredibly frightening for everyone involved, especially because it can be hard to know what, if anything, is going on inside.
And in the author's case, they do eventually start to emerge from that catatonic state. They describe it as this slow, gradual process of returning to a place where they can, function again. They even go back to work, which is just, I don't know, mind-blowing to me considering what they went through. It makes you wonder, with an experience as intense and disruptive as psychosis, is it really possible to just bounce back?
That's the thing, isn't it? It's not really about bouncing back, not to some pre-psychosis self anyway. The author themselves acknowledges that this experience, it changed them fundamentally.
Yeah, how could it not? If your whole reality shattered and reformed, you wouldn't come out of the same person.
Exactly. And I think that's an important thing to remember about mental illness, about any kind of trauma, really. It leaves a mark. It becomes a part of your story, for better or worse.
Right, and the author seems to grapple with that a lot. They talk about this constant awareness of their own vulnerability, this fear that another break could be just around the corner, which is understandable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Imagine living with that kind of uncertainty. It takes incredible strength to keep moving forward, to build a meaningful life in the face of that.
It does, and the author does a pretty remarkable job of it, all things considered.
Yeah.
They're able to return to their work, but it's not without its challenges. They're very honest about the fact that they rely on medication to manage their symptoms. But even that comes with its own set of
The
difficulties.
side effects, the trade-off, it's a constant balancing act, finding what works, what you can live with.
It really is. And I think that's one of the most valuable things we can take away from the author's story, this raw, honest look at what it means to live with a severe mental illness. There are no easy answers, no miracle cures. It's an ongoing journey of self-discovery, of advocating for your own needs, and navigating a system that doesn't always understand the nuances of individual experience. So as we resurface from this deep dive into psychosis, maybe, just maybe, we can carry a bit of the author's courage with us, that willingness to confront difficult truths, to challenge our own perceptions, and to approach mental health with more compassion and understanding. And on that note, that wraps up our deep dive for today. Until next time.